Lord, you catch me when I'm falling, and you've told me who I am. I am yours. I am yours.
Well, are you all tired and sleepy? I've heard the pastor say twice this morning, once wake up and the second one be alert. So I'm very suspicious as to what your professors are putting you through. When you choose to attend training here at Penang Adventist Hospital, and when you choose to work here on the faculty, and when you choose to work in the hospital, you are taking on the value of Adventist health. And let me tell you that, which you've heard before, Adventist health is holistic. But most of all, Adventist health focuses on compassion. So today I want to talk about God is compassionate. And I think that this will ring true with all of us, but you'll hear some interesting things here. I have a Thai brother named Montri. He is one of the most compassionate people I know. My parents met Montri when he was in lab technician training at Bangkok Adventist Hospital. He was 17 years old at that time, a very poor teenager from the town of Ubon in North Thailand. You see him here with my brother and me. Yep, that's us at the bottom of the Penang Hill Railway a long time ago. Later on, my parents were working in Phuket, Thailand, and Montri came down there to work in the lab. And my parents noticed that he had a talent for healthcare. So my dad said, Montri, I will send you to college to get a college degree, and then you can try to get into medical school. So he was sent to college in the Philippines at Adventist University of the Philippines, and then he got into medical school at the University of Santo Tomas and took his medical training there. From there, he went back to Bangkok, where he got into a residency in OBGYN. OBGYN, just like Mama, he told us. And he has been a doctor ever since, just retired about 2 years ago. After I graduated from college, we traveled here to Penang for a visit, and then we traveled up to Thailand to see Montri. And that was where I noticed Montri's compassion. As we were walking down the road in Bangkok, he would pull out his wallet and he would give something little to every beggar on the street. Every beggar, my friends, I am not that compassionate. He gave a little something to each person. I was so impressed, and I thought, would I give to each person in need? And in fact, his influence caused me to be more of a compassionate and giving person. Montri was a Christian, but as many Christian converts do in that part of the world, and this is him with us 2.5 years ago, him with me 2.5 years ago when we visited him in Thailand again. As many Christian converts do in that part of the world, he also retained some of his Buddhist ways from his upbringing. Giving gifts to the poor or those who had no food is part of the Buddhist religion, but it's also the part of other religions for very different reasons, actually. In my understanding of Buddhism, I have read that giving is one way to get merit or credit for yourself. The idea of merit is that you develop purity and goodness, and those acts pile up into a force that can attract good circumstances to your life, and that will improve your mind and your inner well-being. Also, acts of compassion for merit affects your rebirth into better lifetimes. You are connecting to a path that will eventually open you up to achieving nirvana, which is the goal. So that is in Buddhism. In reading about Hinduism, on the other hand, I've discovered that compassion is the result of viewing all people as one human race. If I were a Hindu, I would be compassionate on this principle. If you suffer, I also suffer. So we're all one big human family. If you suffer, I also suffer. This approach aligns very nicely with the words that Jesus expressed when he voiced the golden rule, a rule which is found in every religion. Do to others what you would want others to do to you. In this worldview, I am empathetic to the suffering because I have experienced it, and therefore my heart is soft toward the other person, and I reach out and I try to lift the burden of that suffering. Jainism approaches compassion similarly, but with a little bit of a twist. All of life is sacred, and human life is the highest form of earthly existence. Because of the sacredness of life, we will practice compassion and do what we can to relieve the suffering of people or of animals. Compassion in this worldview is the result of viewing life as sacred. It's really interesting to me how the different religions overlap, all of them valuing compassion, but for a little bit different reasons, and yet compassion is a very high value in all religious beliefs. In Christianity, being compassionate is not to earn yourself a better circumstance. Instead, you are compassionate because of the result of what was done for you, what you have received, not what you did for merit. For example, I was given a life and I was given grace from God. And I never earned or deserved being given life. And I never deserved grace because I do things that are not loving and not caring. And after I have sinned, God still gives me grace, even though I struggle with sin at times. And because of his grace and his compassion for me, I have a full heart and I want to give compassion to others. So that is the thought in Christianity, that I'm responding with a full heart of gratitude to the compassion that God showed to me. I can't help but treat others with the kind of compassion that God has shown me. Compassion in Christianity doesn't take a thought of earning merit or gaining anything for yourself. From the Christian worldview, compassion reaches out to relieve suffering with no thought for yourself, even if it costs you dearly to show compassion to others. So what was my brother Montri doing as he gave something to every beggar? I think he was doing a bit of both his Buddhist and his Christian beliefs. I think he was giving because from his Buddhist background, it was to purify his heart and earn merit. And giving compassion really does have an effect back on your own heart. And from his Christian beliefs, he gave because God and others had been so kind and generous with him that he had the urge to share to others who were less fortunate. When my parents were very, very old, approaching 90, and my mom died 5 years ago and my dad died 4 years ago, they were in having a lot of medical care because, as you know, when you're getting close to 90, things start to break down and you start to have problems. Montri traveled all the way from Thailand to the United States to see his adopted parents, our parents. And when he was there, he came to me and he said, "Do you have enough money to take care of Daddy?" And I said, "Yes, I think we do. I have been watching the bank account." And he said, "Well, I want to help." And he gave me $10,000 to help care for Daddy. See, he had this heart of giving, this heart of gratitude. You have been generous with me. All I can do is to give back. And knowing his giving heart, I couldn't refuse that. If I refused it, I would be disrespecting the gift of his heart. And so I did take it, and it did go to help with the care of parents as they were in their final years. A giving and compassionate heart because of what was done for you, because we are all part of one human race, because when we see the suffering of others, we want to relieve that suffering. My brother Montri, by the way, has gone back to Buddhism over the years. Let's see, I have a picture of that. Yes, there he is, giving offerings at the temple with his wife. And I still see the spark of God in him, in his kindness, in his heart of giving, in his generosity. See, God does not confine compassion to one religion. All religions are trying to answer that question, who is God and how do I come near to him? In seeing the compassion of God and calling on believers to turn and show compassion to others, I think there is that commonality among all of us, to reflect the compassion of God's character, no matter what your belief system is. So let's talk about compassion as we see it in the character of God. The dictionary defines compassion as a sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings and misfortunes of others. You all in healthcare are working every single day with the sufferings and the misfortunes of others. I mentioned on the first day of the Festival of Faith that in the Chinese tradition, the goddess Guanyin is known for her compassion, hearing the prayers of the suffering and helping them. I find that to be really beautiful. How wonderful to pray to a God of compassion. In the Christian and Jewish traditions, we also see a completely compassionate God who cares about our struggles and our suffering. Let me share with you just a few of the many ancient texts in the Bible about the compassion of God. Exodus 33:19, and he said, I myself will make all my goodness to pass before you and will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show compassion to whom I will show compassion. 2 Chronicles 39, for the Lord your God is gracious and compassionate and will not turn his face away from you if you return to him. Always a welcome of compassion. And the last one, the Lord is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and rich in love. The Lord is good to all. He has compassion on all he has made. He's made all of us. He has compassion on all of us. In the time in which these texts were written, the other gods that people believed in were not compassionate. And here are pictures of some of the ancient gods. They were hard-hearted, and the job of people in those times was to appease the gods. They were afraid of them. If there was a drought that ruined your crops and caused you to be in famine, then you must dance around and cut yourself until you bled to convince the god to bring you rain. Not at all the picture of a compassionate God. If there was another tribe threatening to attack and kill you and take your women and your children as slaves, then you should make human sacrifices of your children in order to appease the God and convince your God to protect you. Must we sacrifice to ask God to protect us and to have compassion on us? But that was the belief of the ancient people in those times. And then along came the God of Abraham. In the middle of this kind of scenario, the God of Abraham showed up, and he was very different, as we saw in the text that we just read. He was compassionate and he was caring. He was slow to anger. He was full of mercy, and he wanted to interact with his creatures. A very different character that showed up in those ancient times. And that belief has spread and spread throughout the whole world in several religions, in Judaism, in Islam, and in Christianity, all coming from the God that Abraham became aware of. And then let me take you to some texts about the life of Jesus. We see compassion bursting out all over the place. Oh, how I love the compassion of Jesus. If you have missed it, I love Jesus with all my heart, and his compassion is what draws me to him. Here are some examples. When he came into the towns and saw the crowds of people hoping for healing, it says in Matthew 14:14, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. When I walk through Penang Adventist Hospital and I see people who have pain on their faces, where you can see a foot, as I saw yesterday, wrapped in bandages, something had happened to it. Jesus would have walked up to those people and had compassion in his eyes and would have healed them. In fact, in the Bible, it says some villages he entered, there was not one sick person when he left because of the compassion that he had on them. When there were two blind men by the road who heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, trying to get his attention because they had heard of his reputation as a healer. Matthew records that Jesus stopped and called to them and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord," they answered, "we want our sight." What hopes they were cherishing in their hearts. Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight and they followed him. In Luke 7, as he approached the town gate, there was a dead person being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. Now, a widow had no one to take care of her unless she had children. So if she lost this boy, she would have no source of income. She would be out of a home. She would be destitute, and her son had just died. When the Lord saw her, says the text, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Then he went up and touched the bier. The bier is that frame that they're carrying the body out on, sort of like a stretcher that they were carrying him on. And the bearers stood still. And he said, "Young man, I say to you, get up." The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. What an amazing miracle, raising someone from the dead. It reminds me of the story I told you yesterday of my dad saying to the boy, "Don't be lazy, get off the table and walk." And he did. Very shocking. And it was shocking to the people in these days when Jesus raised a man from the dead who would go back to take care of his widowed mother. As healthcare workers, you'll be interested in this. Here's a picture of my dad when he was the medical director of this hospital. I was looking at the common elements in the stories of Jesus healing people, and in 12 different stories of healing, Jesus reached out to physically touch the people on whom he had compassion, and they were healed. He touched a man with leprosy. In those days, you would not get close to someone with leprosy. He touched the 12-year-old girl who had just died and raised her from the dead. He touched two blind men, and they could see. He touched a deaf man, and he could hear. He touched a woman with a crooked back, and she was able to stand straight again. The Bible records in these miracles that Jesus touched. Touch is a powerful healing force. I remember watching my father's hands as he would diagnose a patient, and he would touch and feel and diagnose by observation and by the feeling of what he experienced going on in this patient's body. Touch is a powerful force. All of these experience the healing touch of Jesus. I think we can learn from this. I believe there is something about God's compassion for his children in which he reaches out and touches us in some way. Either we sense it or a real touch, and there are stories of people feeling the real touch of God on them. He addresses suffering. What kind of God shows this kind of compassion? And what kind of compassion should you and I show to others because of God's compassion to us? There are many stories that I don't know from my parents' time here, and I wish that I had asked my dad to tell them or my mom to tell them and recorded them. I do have my mom's letters that she sent every week to her mom. So I have her stories from the time, but my dad's stories I didn't collect from Penang Adventist Hospital, only the ones that I remember him telling me, and I wish I had. But this story I know about, this next story, because I was there. And I don't have a picture of it, but I'll tell you the story. I was home from boarding school one June when I was, I think, 16 or 17 years old. And Dr. Sam, my father, asked me to visit a patient here in the hospital. His name was Alan Levine, and he was a young tourist from the US, maybe about 21 years old. He had been riding his motorcycle along the north side of Penang Island and had taken one of the curves too fast. Maybe he had taken drugs and then went driving after that. We don't know. But it was a terrible accident. ripping up one of his legs. He was brought by ambulance to Penang Adventist Hospital, and Dr. Sam tried his best to save the leg in surgery when he knew probably he should have just amputated it. Compassion. You try your best to save your patient. You try your best to keep them in the most whole way that they can be in. Dr. Sam was concerned that gangrene was setting in. He had been on the phone to Alan's parents in the US, and they were in shock, and they were seeking updates. Alan was in a bed in the ward. I think there were 12 beds in those wards, and he was in deep depression. So Dr. Sam asked me to go visit because he thought that maybe having a pretty young teenager come by and spend some time with Alan would lift his spirits. I didn't quite know what to do or what to say to this Jewish boy from the United States, and I wasn't that well acquainted with the United States because I'd done all my growing up here. But I went in every day and I sat for a while by Alan Levine's bed. My dad would come by on rounds and he would examine Alan's leg, touching and probing and seeing with his experienced eye, speaking kind words. He put his hand on Alan's shoulder and he shared with him the conversations that he was having with his parents, with Alan's parents. Alan just looked off dully into the distance, and it seemed that he was estranged from his parents at that time, and he had gone off on this excursion to see the world, and he wasn't feeling very connected with them, and yet here he was all broken up in a hospital bed with his parents seeking to somehow make sure that he got well and he got home. Dr. Sam would pray for Alan, and Alan did not participate. After all, he came from a non-observant Jewish family, so he didn't believe in God as his doctor did. I noticed as I went day by day that the smell got worse and worse. It was very hard to sit by him after a while because the smell was so bad. Gangrene had indeed set in, and Alan's tissues in his leg were starting to rot. It wasn't long until Dr. Sam said, "We've tried the best we can, but I'm going to have to amputate Alan's leg in order to save his life." That's when my visits to Alan's bedside stopped. His leg was amputated, and as soon as he was able to travel again, he was carried to an airplane and traveled home to his parents in Massachusetts. My parents went and visited him in the US about a year or so later, and they went out of their way to drive up to Massachusetts to visit Alan Levine and his parents. I saw the picture. There was a man looking like Jesus with a big beard. That was Alan Levine, leaning on his crutches between my parents and his parents, with a sarong on. Dr. Sam said that Alan had thanked him at that time for trying so hard to save him and for being so compassionate. I don't know what happened to Alan Levine after that. I've looked and looked. I'm pretty good at snooping things out on the internet, and I haven't found him anywhere yet. There are people named Alan Levine, but I can't quite make the connection. Is this the guy who had the accident on the north side of Penang Island? So the internet has not revealed to me the rest of the story. So why do I tell this story? It doesn't have a good ending. A young man lost his leg. He couldn't find his way. He ended up back with his parents and no vision of how his life was going to go after that. I tell it because I watched Dr. Sam, my dad, try so hard to save Alan's leg. It didn't matter that Alan had been reckless in driving. It didn't matter that maybe he had been doing drugs and that caused the accident. It didn't matter that Alan was sullen and never said thank you and was depressed and angry in his hospital bed, and that he wasn't respectful to his doctor. It didn't matter that he was just one human being passing through Penang and would soon be gone on his way. He deserved the extra mile in compassion because he was another human being in the human race, and we care for one another as human beings. Compassion means that you treat every person, worthy or not, as a child of God, and you do your best to save them. Compassion means that you go the extra mile for their sake. Compassion means that you touch them with kindness and share encouraging words, no matter how you're feeling. Why compassion? Because that's the character of our God, who has loved us just as we are, who has saved us although we don't deserve it. We're here to reflect that in ways in which we care for one another. Philip Yancey, one of my favorite authors, wrote this: I have come to know a God of compassion, of mercy, and love. I hope if there is one thing that you carry away from this week's Festival of Faith, it is to know that there is a God of compassion, of mercy, and of love for each one of us. God is compassionate. This is a God that you and I can love back. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Dear God, we are so thankful for your compassion for us. We see it all around us in the beauty of nature, in the kindness of others, in your guidance in our lives, in your provision of food and housing and opportunities for us to learn and to serve others. I pray that today we will show compassion to others as a response to your compassion to us, as a recognition of being part of the human race, and also knowing that life that you give us is sacred. Thank you, Lord. I pray that you'll be with each person in this room today. In Jesus' name, amen.